Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're diving into Psalm 70, a really short but just incredibly powerful prayer. And this explainer is brought to you by the team at You Need Faith in Jesus. It's one of those timeless prayers for anyone who's ever found themselves under intense pressure, really needing God to show up, like right now.
So the psalm just rips open with this raw, unfiltered plea. There's no gentle warm up or introduction. It's just this immediate, desperate cry that grips you from the very first line and really sets the tone for everything that follows.
So, you have to ask, why does this prayer start with such intense urgency? Well, let's dig into the purpose behind this psalm and what its ancient title, to bring to remembrance, really tells us about David's state of mind and his relationship with God.
This title is actually so insightful. I want you to think of it like David urgently writing a note, walking right up to God's heavenly throne, and basically placing it on his desk. It's a memorial, a reminder that says, God, please remember me in my trouble. Please don't forget your servant. And what's really interesting is that this prayer actually shows up somewhere else. Psalm 70 is nearly identical to the last 5 verses of Psalm 40. Now, what does that tell us? It shows that this wasn't just some one-off prayer. This was David's go-to cry for help, a familiar pattern of trust he had ready to go for those crisis moments.
So, the crucial point here is this. This verse gives us permission to be brutally honest with God. We don't need these eloquent, perfectly polished prayers when we're in trouble. Sometimes, really, the most spiritual and faith-filled thing you can do is just cry out, God, I need you right now. Okay, so after that initial cry for help, David's prayer takes a sharp turn. He immediately pivots his attention to the source of his pain, and he prays not just for escape, but for God's divine justice to step in. Now, the language here is super intense, but there's a good reason for it. When David says his enemies seek after my soul, he means they were literally trying to kill him. This isn't a prayer for some petty revenge against a coworker who annoyed him. No, this is a plea for the righteous judge of the entire universe to completely dismantle a deadly threat. But the attack wasn't just physical. There was this deep psychological part to it, this cruel mockery that was designed to completely break his spirit. And David, he captures the very sound of this taunting with a specific cutting phrase. And here it is. David captures the sound of that gloating, cruel laughter. Ha ha ha. You can almost hear it, can't you? It's the sound of someone who is delighting in your pain. And his prayer is that the very shame they tried to put on him would just boomerang, becoming their own just reward. And the takeaway for us? It's powerful. When we face ridicule for our faith, a taunt that sounds a lot like the ones hurled at Jesus on the cross, we don't have to hit back. We can bring that hurt directly to God, trusting Him to be our vindicator and to turn the whole situation around in a way that just displays His power. All right, so this is where things get really interesting. Right here in the middle of this desperate prayer, we see this critical turning point. The focus makes a dramatic and honestly beautiful shift away from David's personal enemies and toward the entire community of believers. You see, this is David's ultimate desire. It's not just about his own survival. He wants his personal deliverance to become a public reason for everyone to celebrate. He's praying that everybody who seeks God will see what he's done and just be filled with joy and gladness. So when you break it down, the fruit of God's deliverance is basically threefold. It becomes a reason for all believers to rejoice. It's a cause for gladness in God himself. And it's a motivation to continually declare, let God be magnified. Our personal victories become these powerful testimonies meant to build up the faith of the whole church. Okay, and to wrap it all up, David brings the prayer right back home. He concludes by returning to his own humble position before God. And in doing so, he shows us the very foundation that his confident, desperate faith is built on. I mean, think about it. This is the king we're talking about, a man with armies and wealth, and yet he understood his true spiritual state. He saw himself as poor and needy, completely dependent on God for absolutely everything. And this isn't a confession of weakness. It's a declaration of where his true strength really comes from. So his confidence wasn't in himself, right? It was all in the character of God. He calls God his help, that's the one giving him support in this very moment, and his deliverer, the one he trusts to ultimately rescue him from the whole crisis. It's a faith that works in both the present tense and the future tense. So, okay, this is an amazing ancient psalm. But what about us?
How do we take its raw emotion and this deep theology and apply it directly to the pressures we're facing in our lives right now? How can we actually pray like David? Well, this psalm basically gives us a 4-step playbook that can revolutionize our prayer life, especially when we're under pressure. First, pray honestly. Just like David, we can cry out to God with raw, unfiltered honesty about our fear and our need. Second, trust God's justice. Instead of trying to get our own revenge, we ask God, the righteous judge, to confound the evil plans aimed against us. Third, magnify God publicly. When he answers, our deliverance isn't just for us, it's a public testimony to encourage other believers. And fourth, embrace dependence. We acknowledge that we're poor and needy to invite God's limitless power into our weakness.
And let's just end on this final, powerful line. It's both a declaration of incredible faith, you are my help and my deliverer, and at the same time a cry of hopeful expectation, O Lord, do not delay. It's just the perfect expression of trusting God completely while still longing for him to act, and to act soon.
Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer on the powerful prayer found in Psalm 70. This was brought to you by the You Need Faith in Jesus team.